So you're saying it's unreasonable to affirm that Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate. This is
I'm
what
saying
happened in
I am not
history.
convinced. I am not personally convinced that that's the case, but that's not what we were
I'm
here to
not.
talk about today.
I'm not interested in what you're convinced by. I'm because you agree there's a difference between what would convince you and what is reasonable to believe.
All right, the conversation you're about to watch features a very pertinent portion of a conversation. It's a roughly 2-hour-long debate between atheist Matt Dillahunty and believer Trent Horn. The broad topic at hand here is the resurrection reasonable? But within this topic, they come up with a number of subtopics. They get into what is history actually? What is science? Is there one that's more valid than the other? How do we know the difference? Dillahunty also, interestingly, in the opening here, makes this offhand remark about COVID and getting a second COVID shot that actually comes back into play in a very fascinating way. So with all this being said, let's go ahead and dive in.
I will.
Once this quarantine's over, I'm up for my second inoculation in like 2 weeks, I think. We can sit down in the studio and record.
Matt, can testimonial evidence alone make a belief reasonable?
On its own, no. But testimonial evidence is always viewed within the pool of things we already understand. If you say, I got a new puppy last night, that is reasonable for me to accept because I know that puppies exist and people get them for pets and there's nothing extraordinary. Everything about your claim is consistent with what I already know and understand to be true about reality via experience and evidence. So it's not, you could view that as, your testimony alone is enough. But that's a colloquial thing. That is us saying, I will take you at your word. But the truth is, when I say that, I'm saying, I will take you at your word, considering all the mountains of evidence I have about how the universe already works.
Trent.
Okay. Yeah, what I would say is that in the vast majority of cases, testimony is sufficient. But in some cases, we might need a little bit more. So I think, for example, like with the resurrection, I think we have very good testimony. So we have testimony going back to St. Paul, who was an eyewitness of the original disciples. So we have good evidence to believe, and even atheistic scholars, as I cited, like Paula Fredrickson and Richard Carrier on this, would say that the original disciples claimed Jesus rose from the dead, and this was motivated by a genuine experience that they sincerely thought this had happened. So yeah, I agree, like a testimonial is something, one person's testimony for the mundane. For something that's extra mundane, I might need more testimony. If it's a group of people and they're willing to suffer costly punishment for affirming this belief, then that starts to raise the likelihood the belief is true. Most things we believe about, nearly everything we believe about the ancient world, for example, is based on testimony. Like I cited in my opening statement, if you went on Matt's conclusion, I mean, he even said it was not reasonable to believe Jesus was crucified. You're going to abandon ancient history and scholarship. It's not reasonable.
All right, I'll let
I said I wasn't convinced it was reasonable. I didn't say it was not reasonable.
All right, so there's the setup. Matt is not convinced of either the crucifixion or the resurrection. He says that they're both unreasonable and that the reason why is that there just simply isn't sufficient evidence for either of these events. So we're going to now scrub a little bit forward in the debate to get to this meat of the conversation about evidence. It's about 15 minutes later in the actual conversation. Let's go ahead and dive in.
I'm trying to figure out, like you say, we don't have sufficient evidence for the resurrection, but if you can't tell me what the sufficient evidence is, like what would be sufficient evidence, like if I guess here, I'll ask this question and you can rip it apart if you want.
Okay.
Is your position that you have no idea what sufficient evidence for the resurrection looks like, but you're confident you haven't seen such evidence?
Correct. In the same way that this is asked to me quite often about, what would change your mind about God? And my answer is, I don't know what would change my mind, because it would be arrogant of me to presume that I have the understanding of reality to be able to tell the difference between a real God and a fake God, or some being that's just powerful enough, or a strong delusion, or an evil demon, or whatever else.
Sure.
But if there is a God, that God absolutely knows what would convince me and has not provided that evidence yet.
Okay. But then here's my follow-up question. If you don't know what the sufficient evidence looks like, you have no idea what it looks like, how can you be convinced you haven't seen it? Because what if you failed to recognize it? It'd be like if I said, I have no idea what a hygrometer looks like, but I know I haven't seen one. seems like you've left yourself open to, you've missed it because you don't know what it looks like.
I would never say, if I don't know what a hygrometer looks like, I would never say I know that I haven't seen one.
Okay,
I
what does
could not
sufficient,
say
what
that I
does-
haven't seen something I don't know. What I'm saying is that, and so in all the opportunities for somebody to present sufficient evidence, what they have presented are fallacies and testimony. There's no physical evidence. There's nothing that would rise to the level of being admissible in a courtroom.
Okay, now I'm not sure if Dillahunty misspoke here by accident, but I want to give him the benefit of the doubt. At the same time, I have to say it appears that he just made the argument that eyewitness testimony is not admissible in a courtroom. And of course, the problem with this is that that's not true. I can just quickly read this quotation here from Cornell Law that says, the testimony of a witness shall be admissible in evidence in a criminal prosecution in any trial ordained or established under Article 3 of the Constitution of the United States. So that being said, we can keep going.
You're taking not just an epistemology, but a historiographical approach, like how we do history, that is just totally different from every other historian in the world.
I'm not a historian. I'm not a historian, and I don't care what methods historians use.
Okay, so then you're not. Would you say then you're not qualified to tell us what's reasonable to believe in historical matters?
I can explain to you what I do and don't find reasonable and why. I'm not a historian.
Okay, so now here is where we see the argument from personal incredulity. This is a very revelatory moment in the conversation because this would be like Dillahunty saying, now I'm not a mathematician, but I personally find the quadratic equation unreasonable. So what someone finds unreasonable doesn't prove or change anything. Personal incredulity is not an argument.
What is reasonable for people to believe about the past? Whether you're convinced of it or not doesn't matter. You could say, well, I'm not sure this or that, but there seems to be evidence and historical scholars in agreement on this. And I'm trying just to go with the bedrock here, that Jesus was, just starting with Jesus was crucified. He died by crucifixion. It's not just they believe it. Every historian in the world who teaches at a major university affirms
what a strange clarification. Every historian who teaches at a major university, while you're excluding the two people you've referenced, who I disagree with, by the way, Carrier and Bob Price, who are historians who don't think that Jesus existed. I disagree with them on that, even though people keep trying to saddle me with that. My thing is,
I included the qualification, Matt, because there are many, and I'm not saying this about Richard or Bob or anything like that, but for example, there's lots of people who go, like, there are young Earth creationists who get PhDs in geology.
yes,
but they're not teaching, except for Kurt Wise at Harvard. They're usually not teaching at major universities. I use that clause.
Well, now we've gone to usually.
What?
Well, now we've gone to usually because you had to add a
Okay. Well, that was one. That was just one.
Yeah,
well,
and now you got one outlier.
There's more people in academia, Matt, who believe the Earth is less than 6,000 years old and think Jesus was never crucified. So it's a fringe view. It's rejected. And I know you don't hold that view, but
that's an argumentum ad populum, because the fact that people are convinced of something is not a measure of whether or not it's reasonable. Reasonableness. So first of all, neither truth nor reasonableness is determined by the number of people who believe it or how convinced they are.
Neither truth nor reasonableness is determined by the number of people who believe it or how convinced they are. Fair point. I'm with you so far. But now watch how Trent Horn brings this back to Matt's COVID sensibilities. And you can see him literally buffering in this moment and the cognitive dissonance beginning to take effect as he realizes, and the reason this is so dramatic is that he basically has to face the reality that his is the fringe position, that he is rejecting what historians have agreed upon, that more so by rejecting history itself, he aligns himself with the flat earthers, the young earthers, the anti-vaxxers, and so on. And to be clear, my point here is not to disparage any fringe positions, but rather to highlight the uncomfortable corner that Dillahunty has just painted himself into by denying the extremely well-documented and agreed upon parts of history. But for now, let's go forward and see how does he actually get himself out of this corner.
If you knew someone who is skeptical of getting a vaccine, would you think it'd be good evidence to them to say that, like, all the major medical associations in the world say it's safe and effective?
I'm sorry, one more time?
If a family member was hesitant to get the COVID-19 vaccine, would it be legitimate evidence to tell them every major medical association on Earth says this is safe and effective? Would that be good evidence to share with them?
Yes, because medicine isn't history. Medicine is science.
Is history a
It's
kind
good
of science?
evidence because it's science, not history. It's a different category.
Okay, so you don't think we can have, what about historical sciences like geology?
That's not history. That's science.
Well, what's the
Just
difference?
because it covers a period of time. I mean, everything covers a period of time. Evolution
Right.
covers a period of time. That doesn't make it historical science. It's science. You're putting that on there because you want to smuggle history in. Well, history isn't a science.
What is science?
Science is knowledge. It's literally
They're
what
the
the word
same
means.
they're the same thing?
Well, that's where the origin of the word science is. But the methods,
So like if I
science is
go
about
downstairs,
trying.
if I go
So,
downstairs and look in the fridge and I see that my wife put Coke in there and I have new knowledge, did I just do science?
yes, you did. Science is not a beaker. Science is the process of investigating the world to come up with the best explanation possible. Science does not make proclamations about truth. It just says, based on the information, here's the best explanation we have. That's exactly what science is.
All right, so I've gone into this in more length in other videos, but to state it very plainly here, science is not the only modality that gets someone to truth. It's not the only subject in school for a reason. There's different types of knowledge. Science is one. It's very reductionistic to say that only science is the only way of arriving at truth, the only way of arriving at knowledge. That's just a factually incorrect statement. And if you don't believe me, I'm actually going to play a 50-second clip by actually William Lane Craig giving 5 things that we cannot know through science. Check it out.
Logical and mathematical truths cannot be proven by science. Science presupposes logic and math, so that to try to prove them by science would be arguing in a circle. Metaphysical truths, like there are other minds other than my own, or that the external world is real. Ethical beliefs about statements of value are not accessible by the scientific method. Aesthetic judgments, because the beautiful, like the good, cannot be scientifically proven. And finally, most remarkably, science cannot be justified by the scientific method. Science is permeated with unprovable assumption. For example, in the special theory of relativity, the whole theory hinges on the assumption that the speed of light is constant in a one-way direction between any 2 points A and B. But that strictly cannot be proven. We simply have to assume that. None of these beliefs can be scientifically proven, and yet they are accepted by all of us.
All right, now furthermore, Dillahunty says that science is a process of investigating the world to come up with the best explanation possible. But by this definition, then history would become a subset of science that investigates past events of the world in order to come up with the best explanation possible. And ironically, this is the case that Trent Horn has been trying to make the entire debate, that when you look at the historical facts that we can certainly know, namely the death of Jesus by crucifixion, the empty tomb, the post-resurrection appearances, and the origin of the Christian church, to list just a few, the best explanation of all of these facts when looked at together is the resurrection itself. In fact, Paul, this is very important to think about, Paul the Apostle never met Jesus before his crucifixion. So why did he go from killing Jesus followers to becoming one? That at least is hopefully some food for thought. What would have transformed Paul's life? What would have transformed James, the brother of Jesus' life? What would have led to the early followers of Jesus being terrified, scattered sheep, to suddenly being emboldened and ready to die for this message? This is obviously just one thread in the tapestry, but I hope it is something to consider and think about. At the end of the day, to throw out history and to say that we can't know anything in history for certainty is, in my opinion, a level of skepticism that is not actually helpful towards arriving at knowledge and towards arriving at truth. It's more synonymous to putting one's head under a rock, in my opinion, because if we don't look at the historical record, if we by default throw out the work of historians and throw out the historical method without actually being a historian, to me, it lacks intellectual credibility, and it reveals to me, I would say, a personal bias against where it appears that the evidence is actually pointing to, that uncomfortable claim that Christ actually was who he said that he was, that he actually did vindicate himself from those allegedly blasphemous claims by actually rising again. That being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I definitely did, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks a lot. Bye.
But it's my time, isn't it?
If you want to pontificate, go ahead.
I did, and now I'm done.
Okay.